Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar on the Family Drug and Alcohol Courts in Northern Ireland, kindly brought to us by Dr. Anne Campbell of Queen's University, Belfast. I'm Jenny Ward, I'm from Middlesex University, a senior lecturer in criminology, and I'm chairing today's session. Middlesex is the host organisation for the International Society of Substance Use Professionals. While we wait for a few more of us to join, I'll just give some detail about ISSUP US. It's a membership organisation with over 25,000 members worldwide, working in the fields of substance use, prevention, treatment and recovery care. And the aim of our organisation is to link professionals, networking, exchange, knowledge exchange, training, sharing the best evidence, ethical approaches, and promoting quality in all areas of prevention, treatment, and recovery care practice. If you've not already visited the ISSUP website, please do head over there. There's much information and resources and publications, and also the ways to sign up for free membership. Before we get started, I'll just give a little bit of detail about the format for today. Once I've introduced Anne, Anne will speak on her research of a pilot project of the Family Drug and Alcohol Courts for approximately 35 minutes, and then we have time for the question and answer session. During the session, while Anne's presenting, you're able to enter questions into the chat function here on the pane, and these will be collated by organisers here with us in the team of ISSUP, and we will be inviting you to during the presentation and while the discussion is going on, please do put forward some comments, queries, and that will enliven our discussion with Anne today. So there will be also a recording of the webinar available later on after today's event's finished. And now I'm really delighted to introduce Dr. Anne Campbell from Queen's University, Belfast, and brings with her a great deal of experience. She's a member of the United Kingdom Advisory Council on the Advisory Council of the Misuse of Drugs, and was also winner of the Queen's University Community Impact Award, really illustrating the impacts that Anne's work is having. So Anne today is presenting on this pilot project of the specialist problem-solving family drug and alcohol courts, a really important area of study. And we greatly look forward to hearing from you today, Anne. So without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I just want to say a thank you to Kirsty and Olivia from ISSUP who have made this possible this morning. As Jenny says, they're going to speak for around 35 minutes, and then we're going to hopefully take some questions and generate some interesting discussion about your experiences or about your curiosities or your questions about family drug courts in your area of the world. So I shall now share my screen, and hopefully this will work. And I'm beginning of slideshow. Okay, so this was a pilot study that was initiated by the Department of Justice in Northern Ireland in conjunction with what we call our health and social care trusts, and was conducted by myself, Professor Davy Hayes, and our senior researcher, Dr. Sharon Millen. So the context of FDACs, really, the definition firstly is to provide an alternative problem-solving approach to care proceedings in cases where problematic substance use has been identified as a key factor in the problems experienced by people who are going through this process. The first one in the UK began in 2008, and it ran for a number of years and was formally and independently evaluated by Harwin and Ryan. And I've just for note, I've put all references that are hyperlinked at the end of this presentation, so you can read up on the UK context, and there's some fantastic pieces of research that have been produced since 2012, right up to 2021, and now with our piece, our small piece in 2022. Okay, I'm just trying to move the, okay, and moving on. It was an adaptation of a family court system that was first initiated within the US and also initiated within New Zealand, but from a sort of summary, cursory glance of what's happening in New Zealand, and please correct me, folks out there, I think at the moment there are possibly very few family drug courts operating in New Zealand, and they're mostly in relation to substance use courts that do not involve family members. So it really became prominent because of the revolving door situation of people coming into the criminal justice system time and time again, and we've seen it in Northern Ireland, and I'm sure you've seen it within your respective jurisdictions. So there was there's a repeat offending for people within a family situation or people not within a family situation. And then the model was used then and transferred to fit the cultural nuances of the English and Welsh legal systems. In Northern Ireland, we, just as a bit of background, we have a population of 1.9 million. We have seen increased drug use over the last number of years since what we call the Troubles or the conflict ceased in 1998. And what we expected to happen was an explosion, if you like, of heroin use, much like our counterparts in Dublin. That didn't happen because what's called our paramilitary organisations still had control of the drug market. But recently, unfortunately, the drug market has changed hands, and the paramilitary involvement has decreased, and we have new supply chains coming in. So we have seen in Northern Ireland an increase in drug use, an increase in the types of drugs used, from MPS through, we have a problem with cocaine at the moment, polydrug use, pregabalin, Lyrica, diazepine, or benzodiazepine, sorry, mixed with heroin. So we've seen an increase in deaths in Northern Ireland in correlation with increase in deaths in the remainder of the UK. Ours is particularly problematic because we've had a huge increase in the deaths of young people on the same par with our Scottish colleagues, our Scottish counterparts in the other part of the UK. We also have seen an increase in the number of young women who are going through our different parts of the system, the social services system, who've had experienced births and possibly multiple births, either within a family situation or when they are as part, or they are a single parent family. So the support systems in place, we think, need to be drastically improved in order to affect a positive change in the lives of these young women and young families and the lives of children. So the family drug court is one part of a system that we need to encourage, because we know that the research results for the family drug courts, and I'll talk about that in a moment, are positive for the most part. There are some caveats in there, but for the most part, there are positive results. So the system, the family drug FDAC system, we have specially trained judges who deal with the cases throughout the process. And the important thing is that these judges who have an appetite for this work, and the judges that I've met are very enthusiastic and are very caring as well as professional about the people with whom they work. And they're working with very challenging issues, obviously. So the regular meetings are held with these professionals, these judges. They use court reviews without lawyers present, and that is a very important aspect of the process, and one which our research participants felt was very important. It was less intimidating without the lawyers present within that system or within that process. Crucially, there is help from a specialist multidisciplinary team. From our perspective, we have a consultant psychiatrist, we have a number of mental health practitioners, we have a number of family and childcare social workers, we have a number of what's called guardian ad litems who represent children within our court system, and we have then connections across the health and social care systems in relation to housing and education and other factors within a holistic framework of helping people to overcome their substance use problems. The point at the bottom there, the focus really is the presenting problem, obviously, but anybody who works in addictions and works with mental health would be very familiar with the fact that it's not simply about the substance use problem and the disorder, but a myriad of underlying problems that our people have faced who've come through this system. They have faced trauma, they have faced family breakdown, they have faced loss of employment or a lack of employment or training opportunities. They may have faced deaths, multiple deaths of siblings, witnessed their own parents' substance use and substance use disorders. So there are a range of problems that underlie the substance use problems and disorders that everybody within the FDAC system is made aware of. Okay, so just short history. There are a number of evaluation schemes, FDAC schemes running with concomitant evaluations. The first one ran from 2008, as I say, until 2012. Findings were positive. The main finding was at the end of those proceedings, parents in FDAC were more likely to cease or reduce substances than parents in standard childcare proceedings. And the children in FDAC cases were more likely to return home than children in standard proceedings. Throughout all the research, these proceedings have been positively viewed by professionals, including social workers, as I say, lawyers, guardians, and the treatment service providers, that core team, as well as judges themselves, who are an intricate and crucial part of that process. I have to say from our research that there was initial reticence from some of the lawyers in relation to, I think it was there was a feeling that maybe toes had been stepped on, they weren't part of the process to the extent that they had been familiar with. So there was a little bit of cultural acclimatization into this new process, and I think that was one of the barriers that we sort of faced within that process. So Harman, lovely report in 2016, gave some statistics. I know it's difficult to report statistics without seeming dry, but I think these are important statistics because if we look at the comparison of people involved in the FDAC system in comparison with mothers, fathers, families who are not, then there is that percentage difference. 40% of FDAC mothers no longer using substances in comparison with 25% of the other cohort who were not in the FDAC system. Again, that same percentage reduction when we're thinking about our FDAC fathers. And overall, for the Harman report, more children remained with or returned to the parents at the end of the proceedings. Very importantly, and I think this is where we need to go with research in the UK, it's that follow-up period, because when people are cocooned within a very multivariate and multi-aspect system, that close wraparound support, when that falls away, when they have to return back into the real world without that comprehensive treatment system, then obviously people like myself and others who work within the addiction system, then people have, well, people at risk, people with complex problems have a high rate of relapse usually. So it's about that follow-up period we need to keep our focus on, as well as professionals, researchers and workers. Also important from Harwin, a small cost-benefit study. When we're looking at commissioners, when we're looking at funding, the costs are very important. So it would be good to see more research in relation to this as well. But this small study found that there's cost benefits for the health, for police, for other service provisions in the long term. That's the important point, in the long term. There are some, I suppose, general concern about where fundings come from, and we saw that in our own research. Should it be across our own health and social care services, along with the criminal justice system, or within the rest of the UK, across local authority, children's services, health and justice agencies? And I know latterly the Bedford model, and that is in my references at the bottom of this presentation. Bedford is an area in England, and they began a service in 2018, I think. I could be wrong, but I think it's 18. And it was evaluated in 2021. And one of the main concerns was in relation to that, where was the money coming from? And in that case, I think it came from the police, the PCC within the UK. So it's about thinking about who's funding these projects and how can that funding be spread, because the cost benefits are for health, are for police, and are for our social services, and ultimately that will benefit our people who use services. So what is the process of an FDAC? Importantly and throughout the process, parental involvement in FDAC is voluntary. At the first hearing, if parents agree, the case will be adjourned and the FDAC team will assess the parents. Following the assessment, which can last for a day or longer, depending on the complexity and the nature of what is determined by the team for the needs of the family, and they will be different according to each family. But then we have to do it on a case-by-case basis, using a very firm, person-centred approach to agree that draft plan. This is then discussed with parents and all relevant professionals at a planning meeting, and then at the next court hearing, this becomes the care plan, and parents are invited to formally sign up as being part of the FDAC. And the FDAC team and judge, of course, also sign that agreement. So it's very much a collaborative, person-centred, all-encompassing, all-inclusive process for our people who will use these services and for our workers. In the fortnightly non-lawyer reviews, parents attend the court to discuss successes and barriers. And in our research from the qualitative phase, people were slightly taken aback because they were going to see the judge, or the big judge, as they called our person within the process, and they were slightly intimidated, and they were very quickly put at their ease by a judge in Northern Ireland who was part of this pilot phase. And they couldn't believe that somebody was taking the care, the time, the patience, the interest in their story and in what they had to tell and how they were trying to recover and bring their family together. In the same respect, our judge also had seen some of these people, if you can think about this, come through the system time and time again within the criminal justice system, within his court, but he saw the difference in approach and how the lives, the background stories, the efforts of the people to become involved in the FDAC system. So there was learning on both parts, from the professionals, from the core professionals, and from our people involved, our service users. Okay, I just move on, I'm conscious of time. Okay, can I switch? Can somebody help me here? This is just an overview of a weekly what happens in FDAC in a weekly process. So shall I end the show and come out and maybe bring this up? Hopefully, can people see that?
We can.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It actually worked. Brilliant. Okay. So if you can see that, and I'm not going to go into the detail, but you can see the level of intricacy and the level of detail that is involved from the Monday to the Friday in relation to the formulation of meetings, the precise timetable, the number of people involved, the number of planning meetings, the detail within those planning meetings, the review intervention planning meetings, the pre-proceedings, the involvement of the key workers and at what stage, and the assessment day, and then the ending with everybody and the supervision of staff and report writing and filing for Monday's kick off again. So as I say, I'm not going to go into every detail, but that plan is up there for you to access as well. And I'm going to now try and switch back hopefully without leaving the presentation. Hopefully I don't disappear at this stage. Oh, okay, and I haven't. That's excellent. From current slide, and somebody let me know if I've messed up. If I haven't, I will just continue without any.
Everything is fine.
Excellent. Okay. So when we think about our work package, what do people get? What do people get? And people get, well, roughly the same thing across most of these FDAC proceedings or processes. But from our perspective, we work in a holistic and systemic fashion. We work with the families in relation to the substance use problems, because that's why they're here. We look at interventions such as motivational interviewing, systemic family therapy, and we also have trauma-informed systemic family therapy, as we know as practitioners, researchers, professionals, that a lot of our people involved have experienced trauma and ACEs in their formative years and for some, continue to experience those multi and complex traumas. The key, as I said before, it's tailored support to each family. And we don't just look at the psychosocial support and the input from our consultant psychiatrists and our many health workers, mental health and addiction workers, social workers and guardian ad litems. You can imagine that wraparound team. But we also look at areas that are very important for our people involved in terms of housing, in terms of education and training. And this whole package is underpinned by values, by respecting the dignity of the person involved, of the family involved, by respecting and trying to empower these people to affect change in their lives, by trying to destigmatize the language, the whole concept of substance use and addiction, trying to think about shame and inverted commas, as some people report, remorse, guilt, when people relapse, how do we deal with those problems without further stigmatizing the people with whom we work. So when we're looking at the research, and again, I've put as much research as I can at the bottom of this presentation. There was a lull. There were some pieces of research around the early 2012, 2010, and mid sort of teens or 2000. I'm not even sure it was the noughties for the first decade. I can't remember what you call the second decade. But now I think the most important and overarching and methodologically rigorous piece has been put together by Zhang et al. And I've quoted this specifically because it's a fantastic systematic review of the most, I suppose, the most up-to-date literature at the moment. But as we know, that changes very quickly. So what did they find? They found that overall, again, it replicates what has gone before. Family drug and alcohol courts tend to show a positive effect on family reunification compared with that usual service, that usual court service. Now, the important thing is it's based on high strength evidence. So when we're categorizing, we think about the low strength evidence, mid strength evidence, and this is high strength evidence, which is critically appraised in a very rigorous fashion to give us these results from a total number of 7,085 participants. So that's quite a strong result. Outcome 2, care re-entry and re-abuse. Overall, family drug and alcohol courts saw no effect on care re-entry. And that was based on high strength evidence again from 8 research studies with a total of almost 1,500 participants. So the study importantly did not find that the courts had a robust effect on reducing re-entry or maltreatment re-report. So one of the main recommendations from that was we should consider strengthening follow-up services. And we've said this before, the service cocoons people, it strengthens people, and then they return to the respective communities, and obviously the effects of this fantastic intervention waver to some extent. So we should be focusing on services that are critical for maintaining the stability of reunification. And importantly, monitoring of caregiver substance use to stabilise their abstinence and helping the families build sustainable connections. And again, back to community resources, the social capital, the supportive employment, healthcare, housing. These are all crucial variables in maintaining the success of the family intervention. So the overall aims of the current study to investigate whether our FDAC had an impact on offending and substance use, and to examine other possible effects of the programme, including individual change in coping skills, quality of life, anxiety and depression, and the latter were tested via a number of psychometric tests, including QAL and HADS and Beck's inventory. And so those results from that end of the study are in press at the moment. I'm going to report on the people's perceptions of the process, including the judge, the social workers, the guardian ad litems, and most importantly, most crucially, the people themselves, the families involved in the process. So the research objectives of the qualitative piece was really, without reading this out, seeking the views of everybody involved in that process, including the workers, as I say, including our people at the centre of this process, and including the judge as well. So FDAC in Northern Ireland is one of 5 problem-solving justice initiatives. We also have a domestic violence helpline. We have a substance use court. I'm loath to say substance misuse, because when I think about substance misuse, I think about prescription drug only, because that is our classification now when we're using non-stigmatized language. So our substance disorder use disorder courts, who are working, or which is working very well in Northern Ireland. We also think about our ECO system, which is our enhanced combination orders for people who would have been sentenced to 12 months or less. So that's the 5 problem-solving justice initiatives within Northern Ireland. So this pilot programme, the qualitative piece of it was to establish whether the problem-solving approach could lead to better outcomes for families. Our pilot was within a place called Newry in Northern Ireland, which is I think it has been named a city, but it's a rather small city. It's a large conurbation about 30 miles from Belfast, which is our biggest city in Northern Ireland, and it's within the Southern Health and Social Care Trust. So we interviewed a number of people using a purposive sample technique. The judge, the FDAC team, a number of solicitors, and a number of guardian ad litems within the court system. And the guardian ad litem represents the views of our young people and reports back to the judge. We had a focus group and we had individual interviews. So that FDAC team itself within Northern Ireland is a consultant psychiatrist, 3 senior social work practitioners, and the implementation lead. And then we have a number of mental health workers in there as well, including a mental health nurse. So key summary points from service user interviews. The team talked with each person about what was involved and what would be expected of them during the 26-week duration of the process. Parents were informed that the process was intensive but would help them to stop or reduce alcohol and substances, and that it would require hard work and commitment. So I think that the stall was very clearly laid out about what was expected from our people who were using the services, the court provision, and we spoke in detail also about the worker involvement and what exactly would happen. Now, the wraparound system is fine, but if you can imagine people who are not familiar with this intensive type of treatment program, it can be daunting and intimidating for people. So it's not good to have a piecemeal system that we have within the UK and Northern Ireland, where people jump from substance use to mental health to other service provision, and a lot of the time they fall down between that service provision. On the other hand, our people, it took a while for them to become familiar with that intensive support, which, as I say, you can imagine, it's quite daunting. If they continue to use substances throughout the duration of the process, they would be removed from the programme. Now, in saying that, there were a number of relapses within the programme, which we know happen with any addiction circle. That relapse does happen, and relapse is the most important point when people need support. So we had a number of relapses, but if people continued not to engage or continued not to stay with us and not to give full engagement within the programme, notwithstanding the possibility of relapse, then decisions had been made if people didn't engage, and we couldn't continue to engage. Those interviewed felt that they fully understood the process and what was expected of them, despite that initial reservation. So just one of the service user views, fully understood the process 100%. I understood I was getting support under one roof. It was going to be for me and my kids. It wasn't just treating me on my own. I knew it was going to be intense, but because it was intense, I was more focused, and that if you were willing to put the work in, you will get the support along the way to help you. Hopefully the end goal was then getting your kids back. So I knew what I had to do. Motivating factors. The main motivating factor, and this seems obvious for parents taking part in the FDAC, was the possibility of the return of their child within a quicker time frame, which research has shown compared to the traditional court proceedings. Others spoke of the offer of a fresh start. They wanted to get it right at this time, and spoke of help and support for themselves as well as their children. There was a real desire particularly when people went through that motivational interviewing process, in order for them to think about that, getting onto that cycle of change. There was a strong desire in all our participants to change their circumstances. The opportunity to talk to a team of people who were in the one building, in the one place at the same time, was again unfamiliar, but people were really glad of that opportunity not to repeat the same thing over and over and over again at different time points to different people. So that came out strongly, that there wasn't that repetition of repeating their story. And they really wanted to get to the root of the causes of those problems that had precipitated their substance use disorders. The transparency they were bowled over with, as you can imagine, a lot of the people involved had gone through the social services system, had bad experiences, maybe some of them had come through our care system, into our secure, into possibly a prison environment or criminal justice system, and had bad experiences along the way. So a lot of the work was focused around trying to build that trusting rapport with people, to build that confidence and ability to talk honestly about those problems without the fear of social services coming in to once again pounce and possibly remove their children. Okay, so as I said before, I'll not repeat, the initial perceptions were based on fear, based on the caution of oversharing, making their situation worse. Due to that, if you can imagine, the significant consequence of losing one child or perhaps another child. So that fear, if you can imagine the fear, core to the person going through this process. And for that to be alleviated by a judge was just a complete surprise to them. And there was fear about that. You're still part of a criminal justice system. How on earth can a criminal justice system possibly want to support you? So it was trying to reassure our people that this was the case, this was actually happening. So weird and scary, some people said. Other people reported feeling angry and annoyed at themselves for allowing things to get to this stage. One or two others, conversely, did state that they were just glad that somebody was actually listening to their story, listening to them, not, in inverted commas, looking down at their noses at them, wanting to hear how they had come to that point and wanting to help them recover some sense of themselves and address their problems in a professional way, but also in a caring way. I was angry at myself because if I had went and asked for the help beforehand, it probably wouldn't have ended up the way it did with my child being removed. At the start, oh God, I remember the first couple of weeks going in, and that was before rehab, and I would have just been sweating and shaking, you know, because just the thought of having to sit across the table from him, the judge, in inverted commas. But in saying that, everybody remarked on positive feelings towards the person leading the proceedings. The initial shock that he was so down to earth, as they say in Northern Ireland, and interested in what we had to say. If I had a problem with something, I can just raise it and say, like, this is what I think. Do you know, it was like a two-way thing. It wasn't a case of you just sit down and do what you're told. Do you know the judge encourages you to ask questions and to tell him how you're feeling and what you think, rather than you just sitting there. I felt I could be honest with him because he was being honest with me. Like, that was the whole point of the thing. Those who had previous involvement with family court proceedings had perceived that process to be frightening, complex, unclear, non-collaborative, almost like a punishment in itself, some people had said. Obviously, they agreed then, from what I've just said, that the FDAC process was much better in the way that it worked and regarding their own personal circumstances. Another advantage of FDAC, very important, was the opportunity to get a decision from the courts in a much shorter time frame, 26 weeks as opposed to up to 2 years. So you can imagine the fear, the languishing in the system, from my work, the propensity then to go and use again, to go and try to dumb down that pain of losing the child by further use of alcohol and drugs. Because for some people that was the only way of coping with a hugely, hugely frightening and awful, awful situation. Okay.
And 5 minutes more, if that's possible.
Thank you. Almost there. Yeah, thank you. So just two opposing views there on the traditional court system and the FDAC. The traditional, it was the thing, sitting outside, didn't know what was being said about me, no idea what was going on. They just come out and told me it's just been adjourned or whatever. Do you know what I mean? In this, in the FDAC, you're told everything, you know everything that's happening, everything that's going on, you know you're involved in everything, which made it a lot better. I thought this was a lovely quote just to end on. They're standing waiting on you. They're waiting perhaps for you to relapse, to fall, to grab you and put you back. Like most meetings that I went to, they said, I can't see some of the wording on this, so you can read it yourself. It is okay if you took a drink. It is okay if you relapse, just as long as you get sorted and you get back on to the track again. So I think because I'm running out of time, next steps. So it's to continue to roll out and sustain the FDAC model, to publish our full report with psychometric evaluations, as well as the more detailed findings from our guardian ad litems and lawyers involved and other people involved. But I just wanted to capture some of the service user reviews because I think those were the most important, because these are the people we are dealing with. Getting regular feedback from FDAC families and professionals. Testing the findings of this small study against practice in other courts. I've added, as I say, a list of references for workers, for professionals, for people who may have used the system, things that are there. So there's some great resources as well if you're thinking about or in the process of setting up an FDAC. And then the publication of our final report, which will come out at the end of October, and we can distribute via our colleagues in the ISSUP. And I think that's me. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen. And hopefully we have some questions. I may not be able to answer them all because I'm not an expert in FDAC, but it has been an absolute pleasure and been involved in the process. And I look forward to proceeding and being involved in the process as we take our next steps in Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was a very interesting and hugely important area of research, working with social services, social welfare systems to help people apply a more compassionate approach within the criminal court system. So it's really central, this type of work, and the qualitative detail of the material you've collected is really fascinating. Thank you. We do have a few questions, and one of them really is asking about people who are drawn into this court system, which is, if you can just clarify, these are not people charged with a criminal offence and being sentenced in the court. They're people who are facing problems and looking after their children due to their substance use issues. Yeah. Is that correct?
That's correct. So it's to avert, it's to keep people, I suppose, keep families together, to reunify families, to identify families who have these problems and who may have come through the criminal justice system before or who may have not. But it's about diversion and treatment and giving people the opportunity to do something about the substance use behaviours that ultimately, and we know from serious case reviews, ultimately for some people, not for all, can lead to some dire consequences for the children involved, and then of course the negative repercussions on the family members.
Thank you for just giving that detail. And there was another question which seems to be about the well-being of the family. Yes. And the consequences or negative consequences of within the family and the children. But from my understanding of listening to you, these people have, their children are in the care system. They've been taken into care, and they will perhaps be returned to the children will be returned to them.
That is the ultimate aim, yes, to prevent entry and to prevent re-entry. Are we talking about the welfare of the children and the welfare of the family members? Is that the question within this specific FDAC system, or in general? kind of.
Yeah, the question's asking how the misuse or use of drugs influencing the well-being of the family and what steps are taken to mitigate the negative consequences.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's clear. Thank you for doing that. So as part of the package of care, there is a focus on looking at the substance use, and for some family members, the substance use disorders, and how we can address those through a range of psychosocial interventions and, if needed, pharmacology, because we have our resident consultant there as well. So we know from the research that both the pharmacology and the psychosocial interventions together probably produce the best results, but it depends so much on a case-by-case basis, almost what's needed, what's the requirement, and it depends on the combination of drugs used and what is the best treatment procedure for the people involved. But ultimately, it's to get people into treatment. Get people into treatment very rapidly and get that wraparound system, that holistic system, in order to affect the best change. So yes, we use interventions that are with people, empowering people, have them in a transparent way, in a way that we explain to people what we're doing, why we're doing it, how they're involved, what the possible outcomes may be, and it's to have, I suppose, to encourage ownership from the people involved as well, that they have the ownership of their recovery and they are the main person within that recovery process.
Great, thank you for providing that detail. There is another question and also comment saying, thank you so much for a fascinating insight into the family drug and alcohol courts in Northern Ireland. After FDAC, what would a good follow-up service aftercare look like? Do you have any ideas on this from your research? Thank you for the
well, that's a great question, fantastic question. So I'm part of a couple of different research projects, and I see it time and time again. So I'll use an example. We're looking at alcohol-related brain injury, and we have a unit in Northern Ireland just opened up. It used to be called Korsakoff syndrome, but now we refer to it as alcohol-related brain injury. And from that, we know that when we return our people from the centre back into the community, we had an 80% relapse chance. Now, because we haven't followed up on FDAC, and I can only sort of think from other I suppose extrapolate from other research studies, that I think there's one particular study that looked at a 5-year follow-up in London, or I think Lancaster University, and the reference that again is at the bottom of the page, and they thought the outcomes were, in terms of reunification, that the outcomes, as time went on, there were a number of reunification problems, and the main, I suppose, the main thrust was to keep that service provision, keep that contact, keep that aftercare continuum going for people, keep in contact with people on a regular basis in terms of their substance use, but also in terms of those other factors in their lives in relation to housing and education and systemic family relationships and so on. So that it's a difficult one, because we know that wraparound service is difficult to maintain and sustain in terms of funding and buy-in and commissioning. But I suppose ultimately it's maintaining almost like an outreach service that still delivers a package of care to people to maintain their equilibrium within their family.
Mm-hmm. Actually, there is another question, but I might just jump in if I can. And yeah. I'm interested in the time frame where you mentioned 26 weeks
yes.
in which this intensive package is in place, and also the Harwin et al. Evaluation. They refer to this time for change period. Is that long enough for somebody? 26 weeks, long enough for somebody to prove that their life is on a stable track, or is it necessary for these courts to give a longer period of time, given what we know about relapse?
So we're talking about 6 months, and from my professional experience and from my research experience and from my working experience in the sector over many years, no, it's not enough time. We know that short-term interventions work for a short period of time. We know that mid-interventions, yes, will work when they work when we are working with people. 6 months, I don't think, is a long enough period. No, I think we need at least a year to 18 months, but we do need, the most important thing that our last person brought up there, we do need an aftercare. We do need a continuum of care. And the research from America has shown that the aftercare and the continuum of care for families, for not just FDAC courts, for any intervention, for mothers who use opioids or for women with multifaceted substance use problems, we must keep the care in place for up to a number of years until people are settled, people have moved on, people have obtained their goals, their abstinence or harm reduction goals, and have maintained a quality of life. So in a roundabout way, no, 26 weeks is not enough.
Thank you. So I'll move on to this next question, which is really interesting in terms of breaking down the type of substances that people have problems with, and whether there is correlation between the substances used and their success or failure rate.
Now, I don't know the answer to that question, but the last report that I read was, my goodness, it's one of the reviews. It's actually the last 2019 Zhang review, which points to the fact that we do not know what works for what types of drugs or topology of drugs or the combination of drugs, what works for those different sort of drug combinations as well. So we see in UK, and I'm sure across the world, that the trend in drug use is ever changing. So for example, at the moment in the UK, we've an increase in cocaine use, and I'm talking now in the treatment end of the continuum. We've our IV users, our injecting drug users, are using more cocaine and mixing with heroin. And then specifically within Northern Ireland and Scotland now, and increasingly within the rest of the UK, we're having huge problems with benzodiazepines, with Xanax, with fake Xanax and fake benzodiazepines. So our drug landscape and the mixing of drugs is changing hugely in relation to what people are using across the life stage, from our young people through to our young adults, through to our older people. That mix of drugs and alcohol is changing. So I think that's the next piece of research, is what are the, I suppose, what in response to the change in the drug using patterns, how, and it will filter into our FDAC, so how do we respond to that? So excellent question.
That's an excellent question. I can't see any more here, but I can certainly may ask another question of you. My own interest in these courts and the goal of abstinence.
Yes.
To what extent is this? I mean, we know from the United States and the drugs courts there that abstinence is the what's set out at the start. Is this are we moving in this direction in the UK? We've got these pilot drugs courts coming in at the moment. Is there a space for a conversation where harm reduction, stable lives, and the goal of abstinence, I don't know what you think of that, is one that we might move away from, stabilization in somebody's...
Yeah, move away from abstinence as the only goal. Is that correct, Jenny? Or
are we? I mean, it seems with these drugs courts that have been written into the sentencing white paper in 2020, yes, and the police courts and sentencing acts, that they write in that if somebody is within the drugs courts, if somebody is not adhering to the court order, they could be punished up to 28 days in prison. Yes. And that court order includes abstaining from drugs use. So it seems to be the goal that is dominating, the goal of these therapeutic treatment style courts.
Well, there's Yeah, I suppose there's a difference between the criminal justice courts themselves for people who have offended and the family drug courts. I can only speak from the Northern Ireland perspective that the goal of abstinence was written into the protocol, but in real life, people relapse all the time. That is part of the recovery cycle. So if for everyone that relapsed in our family drug courts, then I don't think we'd have any takers or anybody sustaining their within the process. So I do not think we can rely on abstinence as a goal. And we have to look at the goals and the objectives of the family as well. We have to be realistic about what their wishes are. And for most people, I have to say that we've worked with over the years within this context of family, then abstinence is a goal, but it's not always attainable. Maybe there are some UK colleagues here who could answer better in relation to our substance use treatment courts. I'm not quite sure what they call them in the UK, but we call them substance misuse courts here, unfortunately. So is there anybody in the audience who could give us a perspective on abstinence in relation to those and or the FDAC courts? From ourselves, for the FDAC courts, abstinence is not always possible, and we will not be punitive based on that.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to say someone in the audience can shout out.
Yes.
I don't know that we've got that facility. That have to tie it pretty quickly in the pain, but it opens up a discussion, an important discussion, and for us to find a voice or to present this voice at the decision making court, the court's design of these courts. Let's see if anyone's typing quickly here.
I'm also quite sort of taken aback. I think our sort of UK drug policy is moving back towards a punitive. When I read the Dame Carol Black report, there was a lot of it in relation to criminal justice, and then the recent white paper on cocaine use and fining people, taking their passports off them. The rhetoric for me is changing slightly, and I'm quite disconcerted with the rhetoric at the moment. Why are we moving back to the sort of punitive paradigm? And I hope that doesn't filter into our family drug courts, because we have to move away from that, because I thought we were moving towards not a complete public health model, but a model that we look at harm reduction and not just recovery within the UK, but a harm reduction approach that we're very proud of in Northern Ireland. I have to say that we're not a sort of at the punitive end of the spectrum, but I'm slightly disconcerted about the narrative and the way the UK policy narrative is moving, and I hope that doesn't filter down into our FDAC system.
No, I agree with you very much there, and I'm sure many in the audience do as well, and a very important conversation and challenge in front of us. So we're really at time now, Anne, and just want to say thank you on behalf of ISSUP UK, and it's been a fascinating presentation, a really important area of work. There was a question whether you would mind sharing your slides with.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because there's loads of lovely references in there, and they're all hyperlinked, so people can just access them directly.
It would be great. And also there is a recording of Anne's presentation available from tomorrow. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And once again, a round of applause for Anne's presentation.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.